Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony McAdoo, Executive Director of the WKU Alumni Association. I'm pleased to welcome you to our Hilltoppers at Work webinar series. This series showcases continuing education, professional development, and career management topics for our WKU alumni and friends. Today's webinar topic is stress strategies and is produced through a partnership with the WKU Alumni Association and WKU Continuing and Professional Development. Joining us today on this panel is Derek Olive, Director of Continuing Education and Professional Development, and also as co-host and moderator, Kara Nidell, Program Coordinator of Career and Workforce Development. Kara, welcome. Glad you're here to have you help facilitate today's webinar.
Well, thank you, Anthony. We hope that you enjoy this webinar today and that you find this topic, stress strategy, helpful to the current situation that we might all be dealing with staying at home and dealing with the multiple things that we have dumped on us right now. In the future, if you're looking for any professional development or non-credit training options, feel free to contact us at the WKU Continuing and Professional Development Office. Today we have with us Dr. Aaron Huey. He is a WKU University Distinguished Professor, and he will be leading our discussion today on stress strategies. In addition to his impressive resume with experience in higher ed, Dr. Huey is a regular speaker and presenter for WKU in Continuing and Professional Development. And one thing I do want to go ahead before I turn it over to Dr. Huey is do a couple little housekeeping tips. This is a recorded webinar, and it will be shared with you later if you want to check it out in a recorded version. We'll be at approximately 1 hour long. And throughout this, we will do some poll questions and different chat type questions. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to utilize that chat function at the bottom of your screen. And Dr. Huey will direct you to that at certain times throughout the webinar. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Huey.
Well, thank you, Kara. I appreciate that. And good to see you, Derek and Anthony and all the folks here. You know, it does take a village to put these things on. So I appreciate them and the support for this. And especially I want to say I appreciate everyone who's tuned into the webinar today. I know your time is valuable. Everybody's time seems to be pretty valuable these days. So we'll try to make the most of the next hour or so. A couple things about this webinar. I just want to kind of follow up and reinforce what Kara said there. She's going to be my right hand on this as far as the facilitation part of it. So we do want this to be an interactive experience, as interactive as possible. And so there'll be some questions that we're going to ask as we go through the presentation. We're not going to stop, and wait for the responses to come in. What we're going to do is we'll give you a chance to kind of share with all of us here as facilitators, as also you can share with the other people who are participating in the webinar today. So we'll give you a chance to respond to those, and then we will follow up a little bit later to see what kind of information that you send back to us. But we do want to make this, as interactive as possible. I also like to point out that we do use the learning outcomes, that were marketed as the reason for the webinar today. So we use this as kind of our outline when we put these things together. So we want to make sure we always deliver what was promised. So our hope is that when we finish this hour, you'll be able to look back and say, well, yeah, they actually covered all three of those things pretty well as we go through this. We're all kind of feeling this way these days or whatever. So, you may have different ways of expressing the stress in your life, but we all have that feeling either on the outside or on the inside. We're feeling like, a little bit overwhelmed these days. Some folks are a little bit overwhelmed in the best of times, and some folks, they have a rather high resilience for things, but certainly nobody can argue that, the year is nothing like what it started and what we're dealing with and how our routines have changed, how our employment situations in a lot of cases have changed or have been modified significantly. So, if you're feeling stressed out, first thing I want to point out is that you're perfectly normal. We're all feeling stressed out these days. And for reasons we'll talk about. I wanted to kind of start for just a moment with some key definitions. This is not essential that you memorize these or get these down, but I will use a couple of these terms as we go through the webinar. And so we talk about a stressor. Basically, anything that causes you to experience stress is going to be a stressor. Eustress is kind of that positive stress. Now, you may be one of those folks that, you kind of thrive on stress a little bit to a point. We need stress on our lives to motivate us to do things. It's when it goes beyond a certain point that we have to kind of get a little bit concerned about it there. Distress is often simply referred to as stress. Distress, results in overload a lot of times. You got too many inputs coming in and you're having to process too many things. You feel overwhelmed. And then there's job strain. And we are going to spend a little bit of time today talking about that because this is a big element that people are experiencing these days. The demands that you have, a lot of folks probably attending the webinar today, you had a lot of job responsibilities before the pandemic hit, and you still have a lot of those job responsibilities. You've got other things that are coming in, but the nature of what you're doing has changed a little bit. And, change in and of itself causes people to be stressed out. So you'll hear me talk about these terms kind of back and forth as we go through today's presentations. So again, as Kara and I both mentioned, we got that, there'll be a few of these chat questions coming up. So feel free to use the poll, I believe that Kara has just put up on the screen there. Do you feel you're more stressed out than most people? Think about your current situation, think about what's currently going on in your life. And would you say that you feel, compared to most people that do you feel like you're more stressed out than those folks are? So please take a few minutes to kind of respond to that. We will come back and see of those people who are attending the webinar today. We'll see kind of what your characteristics are. As is the case when I do a lot of these things, these webinars, what I like to do is start off with a little quiz, kind of get a gauge there of how people feel about this. So I'll give you a minute or two to, take out a piece of paper, find something to write on. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You'll probably want to find something to write with too. So take out a piece of paper. And once you've located that piece of paper, what I want you to do is down the left-hand side of the paper, just number 1 to 20. Nothing fancy here. I'm going to put some things on the next few slides I'm going to ask you to respond to. So down the left side of the paper, just number that 1 through 20 there. And there's going to be a series of 20 questions. And what you're going to do is you're going to read the statement and then put a check mark by the one that you think sounds like you. Are you experiencing that right now? Are you feeling that right now? And again, when we do webinars also, we may have a few folks that tune in just to the audio part, so I'll try to read those as we go through it. But again, piece of paper, down the left-hand side, number 1 to 20, and anytime a statement you think applies to you, go ahead and put a little check mark by it. So kind of jump in here. So again, how stressed are you? Read these statements. Number 1, there are many people in my life making demands of my time and energy. Are you feeling that? I'm always in a hurry. I'm always running late. I'm quick to notice loud noises and they irritate me a lot. I'm often caught off guard by events and demands. Or I feel that I have no control over what's happening to me. So again, anytime any one of those statements that applies to you or you feel like it applies to you right now, just put a little check mark by it there. I usually keep my feelings to myself. It's more important to get on with the job at hand. Number 7 there, when someone else is talking, I try to hurry the conversation along. I sometimes finish sentences for other people. I get impatient when I see something being done that more slowly than I think it can be done. I get very irritable if I'm delayed or have to wait. I hate lineups and slow drivers. Or 10, I do one or all the following. Do you fiddle with your hair, scratch, touch your nose, shake your legs, tap your foot, doodle? You may have other things that you do when you're kind of get rid of some of that nervous energy or whatever. But again, if that applies to you, put a little check mark by that number. Do you like to be busy? Number 11 there. Always carry something to do. If there's nothing planned for the evening or the weekend, I take work home. I'm competitive by nature. People who know me think of me as a hard driving individual. I can stay alert and suppress fatigue long after most other people. I know I've packed it in. I thrive on deadlines. I like to work at maximum speed and will do anything to make a delivery. 15 there, I'd rather have the admiration of my friends and coworkers than their affection. Again, any one of those applies to you, put a little check mark by it. Moving on to the last set of questions here, I rarely have time for myself. I know I should exercise more and eat better, but I just don't have time to. When I'm under stress, I often have a cramp or a headache. Other times I feel nauseated, dizzy, faint, break out in a rash. I have trouble going to sleep. Can't turn off my mind after a busy day. Or the last one there, I eat quickly and I often eat and read at the same time. On work days, I either eat at my desk or skip lunch altogether. Sometimes I get indigestion. So any one of those things apply to you. Go ahead and put a little check mark by it there. We'll give everybody a chance to kind of tally that up. And once you get finished, add the number of check marks that you have. So let's see what the verdict is. I know we asked you to tell us if you felt like you're more stressed out than most folks. Well, maybe we'll have a little empirical evidence here to kind of go along with that. If you have fewer than 10 check marks, it's really unlikely that stress is dominating your life at the moment. Now, if you have 11 to 15, you're likely one of those hard driving folks who could probably benefit from a stress defense plan. Now, if you have more than 15 check marks, you need to really understand the negative effect that your lifestyle could be having on your health. So again, not meaning to get anybody overly concerned about things. If you're sitting there going, well, I've got 19 check marks on this. Well, this is something for you to think about. Don't panic, because that's going to simply add to your stress level. So you need to look back over those items that you've seen that, think about how you do things kind of moving forward. So now that we've done the quiz here, Kara, we'll come back and the people who are attending today, do they feel like they're more stressed out or less? Okay.
So 50% said they are more stressed out, and the other 50% say they feel about average.
Okay. Well, that's good. We got kind of a good breakdown. Not a real strong trend there in any direction, but I noticed we didn't have a lot of no's on that kind of thing, so that's kind of interesting. There's only, we all want to reduce the stress in their life, but really we need to keep in mind there's really only one group of people that have no stress in their life, and probably most of you don't want to join this group at the moment anyway. Okay, so if you start thinking, well, I don't want to have any stress in my life, well, there'll be a time at some point in the future, hopefully way in the future, when you won't. Okay, so until that time, we all need to learn how to deal with stress, deal with it a little bit more effectively. One of the things that I include this slide on a number of presentations that I do, is that awareness doesn't always lead to action. We're going to talk about some strategies, and we're going to talk about some realities here. We're going to talk about some things related to stress. And I have no doubt that there are going to be people attending the webinar and be going, yeah, I agree with that. That's absolutely correct. I should be doing that. That doesn't mean you're going to actually do it or do anything about it. Human beings can be somewhat irrational sometimes. I work with a lot of people. I know a lot of people that can very good at articulating exactly what they should do. Here's what I should do. It'd be in my best interest to do it. That doesn't mean they have the motivation to do that. And just as a kind of a precursor shout out, we are going to have a webinar on motivation coming up. There is a method to the madness of this whole webinar series. We've talked about time management, stress, and motivation. Well, motivation is the key to a lot of things. You can know exactly how to handle the stress in your life, but if you're not motivated to follow through and do those things, it's not really going to help you very much. So, and, awareness is a critical first step. You need to know what's going on before have some ideas about how to deal with it. So I kind of wanted to point that out. So now let me, this is, this may hit close to home for some folks out there, but is your job the main cause of the stress in your life? And again, we really don't keep up with who's attending the webinars. We want people to be honest and that kind of thing. But for a lot of folks, some people, their job, I know people that their job is their stress relief. They're really stressed out these days because, they're having to spend all their time at home, can't go to the office, can't go to their place of work. And when they can't do that, they kind of miss it in their life. And, it causes them to be a lot more stressed. But a lot of folks, their job may be. So we asked the folks, you're attending here, do you think that the job is the main cause of stress in your life? And we'll come back to that in just a moment. See here. Okay. Let's talk about this workplace stress here for just a moment. in a lot of studies, and you can find a lot of different statistics out there related to this topic, but, this seems to be the most accurate information we could find. About 26 to 40% of Americans find their work to be very or extremely stressful. Obviously, that's going to be magnified these days with what's going on. 25% believe their jobs are the most stressful part of their lives. And then about 35% of folks are somewhat or completely dissatisfied, with their job-related stress and how they handle that. So, Kara, have folks had a chance to kind of respond to the poll there about this one?
Yes,
Okay.
we were split down the middle with 50% saying yes and 50% saying no. I had asked them if they said no, if they wouldn't mind to tell me what it was, and we had one participant say that anxiety seems to be the main cause.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we'll follow up on the uncertainty. Uncertainty simply causes anxiety, which relates to that stress. So, there's a couple of things here we want to mention. There's stress, and then there's kind of job stress. And there's acute stress that you feel in the moment. You get really stressed out. It passes, something happens, you deal with it, you develop a solution to the problem you're dealing with. And then there's also more chronic stress. And when we talk about the stress that relates to your health and has a detrimental effect on your health and well-being, both of these can, but the one we're most concerned about is chronic stress. It's that stress that just kind of maybe at a lower level, but exists over a long period of time. If you're in a job that you're not really happy with, and there can be a number of reasons for that, we all have days, we all have moments, we all have times when we get really stressed out. Something happens, we have an incident. We can deal with those types of things for the most part. We get some resolution to it, we move on. It's that chronic stress that's always there, always at a lower level, that's going to cause the most problems for us in the long run. If you're one of those folks that you're naturally stressed out anyway, you have kind of a higher baseline for stress, and you're also in a job situation that contributes and adds to that stress level, you're particularly at high risk for some of the detrimental things that can happen as a result of stress. So one of the things we talk about, acute stress, that's that stress that happens in the moment. We all get stressed out. We've all had these experiences where, things were going around when you get hit with something unexpected. And that's been happening a lot lately with, all the uncertainty that's out there. In the moment, you get really alert, you're really excited, you get an increase in energy, you feel a lot of adrenaline start pumping or whatever. You have that sense of uneasiness and worry. In the absence of information, most human beings tend to assume the worst. So, something happens, something's different. We never think, well, this is going to be great. It's all going to work out for the best. We always go to the worst case scenario, which causes us to feel sad. If it goes on, in the moment, you could have been very hungry, getting ready for lunchtime, and something happens, you have an unanticipated crisis comes along, well, suddenly you don't feel like eating anymore. You start to be more susceptible to disease and those types of things, and your metabolism does tend to increase in the short term. So you lose your appetite, but you're expending more energy, which is a recipe for, your body's going to kind of shut down eventually. It's this chronic stress, too, that we want to really talk a little bit more about. Chronic stress leads to, if you have too much acute stress on a consistent basis, you end up with anxiety and panic attacks. You could end up being depressed, having eating problems. You have a much lower resistance to disease and sickness that comes along. You tend to be very irritable. Your coworkers will notice this about you. Your family members will notice it. It can also, in the long term, you experience chronic stress for a long enough period of time. It does lead to conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, loss of sex drive, all those types of things. So we're talking about something that a lot of people just assume stress that's just a part of life. You have to learn to deal with it. Well, there's a lot of truth in that statement, but some people are not as good at handling things, particularly in the longer term. They're not aware always of the detrimental influence it's having on their body. So, got a quick question here. Do you experience stress more in your head or in your stomach? Think about that one for just a minute. When you talk to people about stress in their lives, when people describe it, most of the time they either describe it, well, when I'm under stress, I have headaches. I just can't think. My head just throbs or whatever. Or the other way that a lot of people experience stress is in their stomach. They start to have digestive problems. They get under stress and they don't want to be too far from the restroom, those things, but it just starts to affect their whole digestion. And if you're really lucky, you have both of those. You have headaches, you have digestive problems, but there does tend to be a tendency that among human beings that you either comes out as headaches or it comes out more as in the stomach there. So, Kara, we'll pause there for a minute. What was the response there? Okay.
80% with their head and 20% in the stomach.
Okay, well, I can probably boost those numbers on the stomach a little bit because that's where my stress usually comes out. Wherever if I'm under a lot of stress, it'll show up in digestive types of problems, and that's good. It's good to know these things about yourself. I tend to run a lot, and I tend to run on a consistent basis. Well, if I'm under a lot of stress, I'm careful about going for a long run. If I'm out there stressed about something, I need to pick a route where I can get back to the house if I need to. But a lot of folks, they develop really severe headaches and they can't really think about things. Your stress response, the body, as is the case with when you're physically ill or you have a physical condition, the body attempts to deal with it. The body responds. You have an immune system that if you're invaded by a bacteria, a virus or something, the body is not helpless. It does tend to, rally its defenses. But a stress response is this unconscious mobilization. It's not something you even have to think about. You put people under stress, certain predictable things happen. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, you just feel kind of psyched up about things. And all these things on the screen here. You put most people under stress, particularly acute stress where something happens in the moment. Blood flow increases, the heart rate increases, sugar levels increase, blood pressure in arteries increases, your pupils tend to dilate, your intestinal muscles relax, breathing rate increases, all those types of things. And again, they're both related to either your head or your stomach in some respect. And the thing about we need to keep in mind is that you really have no control over that. It's not something you can consciously say, well, I'm going to lower my blood pressure and I'm not going to let that be a response to stress. It just happens automatically. The body is way ahead of you most of the time when you're dealing with stress. So some signs of stress, we've mentioned a couple of these earlier. You just feel irritable. I've known people that have been really stressed out. They just say, well, I don't know why I feel this way. Everything bothers me. Things that, a coworker normally pops their head in the office and says, hello, how's it going? I'm friendly with them. And it seemed like the day when they did it, I just wanted to slap them, Hopefully they didn't, but you just feel real irritable about things. You can't sleep. You lay there, and you watch the clock go from 1:20 to 2:10 to 3:15 to 4, and then about the time you're supposed to get up, you fall asleep. You don't have any joy in life. Your appetite is disturbed. Normally you're pretty hungry most of the time, but you're not, or you want to eat all the time. A lot of people deal with stress that way. And, you start to have relationship problems. If you're under stress for a period of time, it starts to affect every dimension of your life. It affects your relationships. It affects your work. It affects your health. It affects everything about you. So there's really two models here, and you can kind of decide as we go through this which one seems to make a little more sense to you, because there are different ways that we look at stress. There's what we call this demand control model. That stress, you've experienced stress on the job, it's a result of both demands and job control. Stress is highest when the demands are high, but you feel like you have little control over the situation. I've experienced this lately, where I've got a lot of stuff going on, but I don't have a lot of control over what I need to have control over in order to handle it the most effective way. So that causes me a great deal of stress. I had an exchange with my department head fairly recently about, okay, you telling me you want me to change this, but you're not telling me how I should change it or what you want me to change it to. But, it's like you get hired for a job. If Derek here hires me for a job and he tells me, well, listen, Aaron, congratulations, you're hired. I'm not going to tell you what I want you to do in this job. I'm just going to tell you when you don't do it. Well, it's not going to be a real surprise when I'm really stressed out about things, because no matter what I do, Derek could always claim it's either what he wanted or not what he wanted based on how he happens to be feeling at the time. And that stresses me out. That would stress anybody out. Another way of looking at workplace stress is the effort reward imbalance model. And these are kind of fancy terms sometimes we use to describe this, but I would venture to say everybody in this webinar knows exactly what we're talking about here. Stress is highest when the required effort is high, but the rewards are low. So no matter how well you do the job, how much effort you put into it, how much time you put into it, you're not going to benefit much out of it. So, you would like to think that, effort makes a difference. So if I put more effort into this, there should be some payoff, maybe not monetarily. If you want to stress people out, there's a lot of ways to do it if you're in a supervisory leadership role. One is that you just simply create a situation where there's an unequal distribution of labor, meaning that I'm here working myself to death and nothing good ever happens to me. I look at one of my coworkers, they show up and it seems like they're barely conscious. They're not getting anything done at all. And at the end of the day, we're both getting paid the same. We're both getting paid the same compensation. And eventually, now some people will always do a good job simply because that's who they are. It's part of their personality. But a lot of people, you put them in that situation, they'll look up one day and go, why am I killing myself? I go above and beyond and do everything I need to be doing. Nothing good ever happens to me. Nothing bad ever happens to them. And then suddenly I develop that proverbial bad attitude. Well, why am I killing myself? I'm just going to do what everybody else does around here. And then I get into trouble for that, which creates more stress. So there's lots of different ways. And as I talk about those things, I could just almost feel people kind of shaking their heads a little bit. You've experienced those types of things. And if you're a really, really competent, conscientious worker, you probably get stressed out because you don't feel like you're being appreciated a lot of times. And that causes people to feel stressed. So if you put it on a grid like this, the higher your job control, the higher the job demands, in order to alleviate stress, if you have a highly demanding job, you need a lot of control over how that job's done. If you have a lot of demands, but you don't have a lot of control over how things are done, that's going to cause stress. If you have low job demands and low job control, you're just kind of there. Okay. We all know folks, we've all worked with folks in the past that they're just kind of there. Nothing ever gets to them because nothing ever really has to get to them. We don't put a lot of demands on them. Maybe based on their track record in the past, they've shown they can't handle a lot. And so you're one of those competent individuals that does a really good job. If you're not careful, you end up being overworked because you are so good. It's great to be, if I've got a really important task and I know Kara is one of those folks that always does a fantastic job with everything, well, that's great. I'm going to think of her first every time I got an important job that needs to be done. And she likes that to a point until she realizes she's doing a whole lot more than some of her coworkers. And they're all getting compensated at about the same, but I'm asking more out of her because I know she's capable of it. And that causes her to be stressed out over time. So, those that are in leadership roles just need to kind of think about this a little bit. It's great to have competent, motivated people that know what they're doing, but you also need to work on developing everybody else in your area, your office, your company, department, team, whatever, so that you can distribute the labor a little bit more equitably there. This imbalance leads to a lot of things. Some people put a lot of stock in tangible rewards, the compensation, the benefits, those types of things. Some people put a lot more stock in intangible rewards. I know people that they don't actually want a whole lot more money. Most of us would take more money if we had the opportunity, but we do like to feel appreciated. To just tell people that they're doing a good job, that could be a really good reward. And again, we need to acknowledge people that do go put a lot of effort into their jobs and go above and beyond. We don't want them to be stressed out. You don't want your high performers to be looking for something else to do that are really contributing to that's going to create stress for you, everybody else in the organization if you lose really good people. So imbalance is a big, big issue in stress, both in creation of stress and in the alleviation of stress. Is your stress, another chat question here, give you a chance to kind of tell us what you're thinking. Is your stress related to the different roles you play in life? That seems like almost a rhetorical kind of question, but if you go a little deep into it, it's not. Do you think your stress is related to those different roles that you play? So we'll come back to that one in just a moment here. Let me see. Okay, role conflict. This is a big stressor. We've talked about a couple of things here that cause stress. This is a big one for a lot of folks. a situation, different roles lead to conflicting expectations. You know you need to take care of yourself. You know you need to get your work done for your job. You know you need to take care of your family. So, and if we had infinite amount of time and energy and effort and this kind of thing, we could develop, most of us could develop a pretty good schedule. We could stay balanced. We could make sure all the bases are covered, make sure everybody's happy. If you find a way to do that on a consistent basis, please get in touch with us, because we'd like to know what your secret is. Most of us, particularly now, most of us are working from home. Not everybody can work from home, and sometimes we forget that, those of us that do have that option. But, that's even going to be more stressful in those situations where they can't. When you're at home, you still have demands for all these different roles that you're playing, and they're going to come into conflict, and it's going to get you into trouble with some of your key relationships with other folks, but it's also going to cause a lot of stress within you, feeling like you can't have all the bases covered. So, Kara, I'll pop back, and what was the kind of the response there?
Well,
Yeah.
we had an overwhelming response of 100%.
Yeah.
And we had
Yeah.
a sidebar chat question chat that said the competition between the roles is the most stressful
Yeah.
part.
Well, it's interesting if you'll notice, and this creates stress for a lot of folks, that everybody knows how you should be spending your time and what your priorities are. And if you're not doing what other people think they should be, you're going to be stressed out, because, you can't divide your time. You can't compartmentalize in the way that some people kind of think they can. So some ideas about here, we're not talking necessarily about rocket science on these things. That's where we get back to the awareness doesn't always lead to action. And, you got to focus on what's truly important. And again, most people, if you ask them what's really important, they can list those things for you. Well, family is most important and all this stuff. Well, what will happen too is that if I want to know what you consider is really important, all I really have to do is follow you around for a while, maybe with a clipboard, and I'll be able to tell you what's really important to you, regardless of what you tell me is important. So when you start focusing on your priorities, you don't want to be one of those folks that you're good at articulating what's important. You're just not good at following up on what you should do based on what you're telling yourself is what's most important. Take advantage of work-related options. There's a lot of folks in a lot of positions that do have options, when things are back to normal, whatever normal is going to be. Some people do very well teaching, for example, online classes. Some people need to stay away from online classes. Some people, when they offer their classes, when they have some flexibility on when their work can be done. And not everybody has that flexibility. You need to take advantage of those options that will help you maintain that balance. Protect your non-work time. And one of the things we talked about in the time management webinar was that you need structure. The tendency, if you're working from home, is to get up a little bit later. You're a little bit more relaxed about things, but you need structure. And if you've told the family that you're going to spend a couple hours with them, you don't need to let anything crowd in on that. That's going to cause stress. Manage your personal time a little bit better, and set aside specific time each week for recreation. That gets back to that whole exercise thing. We do need to take care of ourselves. Everybody has a different way of doing it. If you ever spend any time in a gym, you don't have to spend very long. You'll get all kinds of advice from everybody, and a lot of it will be conflicting. You got to figure out what works best for you, but you do have to set aside specific time to take care of yourself on a daily basis. Earlier today, I didn't get the login information for the webinar. And so, I was starting to get a little stressed. so I emailed Anthony there and said, okay, I didn't get this information yet. And I don't know if he picked up on it, but I said, look, I'm going to go for a run and I'll come back, and I'm assuming I'll have the information, all that kind of thing. That's the way I deal with stuff. And so, and when I got back, sure enough, we had login information and it was all ready to go. But, that's the way I deal with stress. I have to kind of get away from it, come back to it a little bit later. Work-related stressors, role ambiguity. You're not sure what you're responsible for or what you need to be handling. Anytime you're in a situation where you have a lot of finger pointing, you're going to have stress. Work overload. You got too much. Physically, it's impossible for you to get the work done that you've been assigned. Some people, occupation is just, they're in a very high stress occupation. If I work in an emergency room these days, I'd probably be stressed out to the max all the time. Normally, I would always have a little bit of stress in my life, but the occupation, resource inadequacy, I don't have the tools I need to do the job the way I like to do it. We've been kind of banned from campus, most of us at my institution here today. And so I didn't realize how much stuff I have at my office that I really need, to teach and to prepare for the summer and those types of things. Working conditions, people have working conditions that are just, stress producing. Management style, either your management style as a manager or the management style of the people above you, particularly your direct supervisor. If you have a good relationship with your direct supervisor, you can deal with a lot of stress. If you don't have a good relationship with your direct supervisor, everything is going to be stressful and it'll get to you after a while. Monitoring, people that are constantly checking on it, you're checking on yourself, you're monitoring yourself. That can be stressful. I've known people that, they're always monitoring what kind of things they're eating and all this. And, one of the things that we do as far as the wellness program at Western, we kind of monitor, we keep up with the amount of exercise that we do and different foods that we're eating. Well, I found that that can be stressful in and of itself just to do that. And then job security. If you're not sure you're going to have a job or your job is going to change, you are probably have a low level of stress all the time that varies up and down. So, and that can be also a combination of some of these things. If you have a supervisor that constantly threatens you, well, at least you have a job? that doesn't make me feel any better. Okay. So job security, and a lot of that in our society these days, you work in the restaurant industry, you work in the hotel industry, you work in the travel industry, there's a lot of concerns about your job. Even when things get back to normal, whatever that's going to be, still going to be a very stressful time. So individual experiences, we all experience stress a little bit differently. We probably have some type A's. You're just kind of always uptight, always, like hard charging. Type B, a little bit more laid back about things. And you don't have to take any fancy psychological tests. You know whether or not you lean toward a type A personality or type B. Your self-esteem, not necessarily just your ego or your self-confidence, but your self-worth ties into how you experience stress. Just your hardiness. How much can you take? Some people, some people can manage a lot. They can take a lot. Some people have their job performance has done much better. Their relationships are much better because they needed to be under a little bit of stress than what they were. But some of us can handle more. The danger is assuming that other people are like you. You might be one of those people that can handle a lot. Well, that doesn't mean that the people you work with or people report to you or your coworkers can, or your family members can handle as much as you can. And then your gender. There's this comes into play in everything that we do. If you have a job that involves relationship building and those types of things, well, the evidence is pretty clear. This is not a stereotype. Women tend to be a little bit better at the relationship types of things than guys do. They tend to understand things a little bit differently. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but that experience is things that would stress me out wouldn't necessarily stress my wife out and vice versa. So those kind of things come into play. And I can attest to that. You may have a job that's just an extreme job. My father worked swing shift. My father spent about 33 years of his life working 7 days, take a day off, work 7 afternoons, take a day off, work 7 midnights, take 3 or 4 days off and do it again. I'm convinced that probably took some years off his life because every time your body would get used to working days, you would change it up. Next thing you know, your whole sleep pattern was different. So you may have one of those extreme jobs. If you have an extreme job, you just need to be aware that you are at kind of a higher risk category for stress. And you have people that you may be a workaholic. Anytime you call somebody kind of a workaholic, there's a reason that you get called that. And, it's hard for people that their identity is so tied up in their job. That's who they are, to kind of get them to detach from that. And, there's some questions there that, we kind of ask occasionally. There's a gender difference that does come to that. If you're, even in 2020, This is a whole different situation. Women who are really successful at their job are still expected to do an inordinate percentage of the work at home. So it's not only do they have the added stress of their job in the current situation, but then they also have to do those things that they normally associated with doing, at home. And so it causes a very stressful situation. So consequences of stress, we have to look at it both as an individual and both for the organization. And there are very definite things that we can talk about here. Individual consequences of stress, they're psychological. Again, we mentioned some of these earlier. You tend to have anxiety, depression, lower self-esteem, sleeplessness, frustration, family problems, burnout. I know people that are really, really good at their job, but you put them under enough stress, they don't want to do it anymore. Physiological, you end up with high blood pressure, muscle tension, headaches, ulcers, skin disease, you have rash, impaired immune system, you fracture more easily, you tend to sprain more easily, and eventually this can lead to heart disease and cancer. And then behavioral, people you can either deal with stress in a productive way or you can deal with it in an unproductive way. People that are under stress, excessive smoking, substance abuse, prone to accidents, and depending on what your occupation is, this could really not be good. Appetite disorders, or in extreme cases, violence. You put people under enough stress and bad things happen. You don't have to watch the nightly news too many times to see where somebody was obviously under way too much stress and didn't have a productive way of dealing with it. So for the organization, you got too many of your people out there stressed out. They're not going to want to be there. They're going to be absent. They're not going to be productive. They're going to start filing compensation claims and health insurance claims, and they're going to incur a lot of direct medical expenses. And this estimate probably has gone up a little bit over the last few weeks. $200 billion a year can be directly related back to job stress. So the more we can all get a handle on this, the better off we're all going to be as far as dealing with this. What's the kind of interesting question here we were talking about when we put this webinar together? What is one thing you do to deal with stress? So just kind of use that chat function there and let us know what's really the one thing that you do. I mentioned earlier I tend to run. I'm not a fanatic about it because I know, I've had people tell me at work, well, you haven't run yet, have you? Well, what they mean by that is they're not asking about my health and well-being. Obviously, I'm being kind of short with them and I'm being irritable. And, I don't notice it so much, but the people around you do. So, so one thing that you do to deal with stress, we'll come back in just a moment there and talk about that. This sounds kind of a little pretentious. I realize most of us can't just go out and find another job. But over time, opportunities will present themselves, and you tend to gravitate towards certain working conditions and certain positions. You tend to gravitate away from others. It always is amazing to me that if you go into a department or a company or a team, and particularly if the leader there has been for an extended period of time, they've been there 15, 20 years, the whole department, the whole team starts to take on the personality of the person who's in charge. Well, what has happened is over time, people who like that person, they like working with them, they like their style, like the way of doing things, they tend to stay and they tend to get promoted. They move up. The people that don't like them, over a number of years, opportunities will come up. They'll gravitate away from that person. So you end up with sometimes a whole department having the personality of the person that's kind of in a leadership role. Sometimes we need to do some job analysis. Maybe, you're actually capable of doing an excellent job. The job just needs to be redesigned a little bit. And that's where you need to have conversations maybe with your supervisor and talk about, there may be a better way of doing this. Healthier ways of coping. It's much better to run than probably to smoke 2 packs a day. Both are going to be stress reducing, but one's going to have some inadvertent consequences over time. Exercise, proper diet, support networks, people that can help you, and relaxation techniques. It all comes down to those things. We can talk about a lot of different topics, and this is where that, again, awareness doesn't always lead to action. We know these things. We know we make some adjustments to those things. We're going to be able to deal much better with stress. We just don't do it. So, Kara, what are some things people do?
Yeah, we have quite a few that are on the exercise train, walking, jogging, ending their days with walks, talking to people about, what's going on. writing in a journal, getting massages.
Mhm.
I think that's a great idea right now. Going for a drive. And then I think we need to work on Derek, because Derek said junk food.
Yeah. Well, I can relate to all of those things. You know, when I worked in administration some years ago, there was a vending machine right outside my office, literally right around the corner. And so about mid-morning, it was too tempting. I could go by there and get something out of it. And then mid-afternoon, it was really tempting too. And so I put on a lot of weight and those types of things. But yeah, we all see, again, we all know this about ourselves, and we know what we should do to be more productive and deal with it better, but we don't always do those things. So good. So stress management, again, just to kind of wind down here a little bit. These are things you've been hearing your whole life. And these are things that you can't, most of us are not going to do all those things, but we need to pick the things that we think, you know, we have an interest in. You tend to stay with something that you like to do. You know, I know a lot of people that swear by yoga, for example. That has to be their thing. Not really my thing. I have to find other ways to do this stuff. But, you know, if it works for them, good. Find a way to, you know, exercise, healthy habits, be realistic about things. If you decide you're going to start running, don't go out and decide you're going to run, you know, 10 miles the first day. Okay. You won't make it to the second day. You have to kind of build up to it over time. You got to, you know, systematic relaxation where, you know, those commercials that you see on television, you know, do nothing for the next 15 seconds, do nothing for the next 30 seconds. You know, I thought that was kind of hokey to begin with, but the more I realized, you know, this helps. You can just stop what you're doing for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. It does make a difference. Take some breath there. You know, some people, they swear by meditation, you know, develop and use your planning skills. We covered this one in the time management webinar. The better you are at managing your time, the less stress you're going to have. You know, try to simplify things. Some of us think we're the only person that can do things, particularly on our job or whatever. But, you know, delegate things and then try to take it one thing at a time, one day at a time. Don't get overwhelmed. If you think about all the 25 things you have to get done today all at once, it can be overwhelming and you may not do anything. You just kind of shut down. You know, avoid unnecessary competition. This is so ingrained in some people. That's a hard one to overcome. Some people will turn anything into a competition. And for them, that can be a stress relieving kind of thing. For other people, that's stress inducing. You know, you got to recognize and accept your personal limits. Some people think they're Superman, Superwoman. They're really not. They need to realize they have limitations. You know, social support networks. We're not talking about Facebook. We're talking about actual social support networks out there. You know, everything's virtual these days, but you need people you can talk to one-on-one and talk about how you're feeling. Focus on enjoying what you do. You know, the more things you have on your job, for example, that you actually like to do, the less stress producing it's going to be. You still have to, we all have to do things on our job that we don't want to do. There's going to be stress producing. Careful about the criticism. You know, some people, when they get under stress, they become really sensitive to criticism, or they start dishing it out in greater doses with other folks, which only increases it increases their stress level as well as the people they're criticizing. And occasionally you just have to take some time off. You know, if you didn't get everything done in the 40 hours that you put in, the tendencies, well, I can always spend all day Saturday working on this. That will catch up to you eventually and cause even more stress than it did in the past. So all those things, you know, as an organization, I wanted to include just kind of a slide here. Things that you can do if you're in a leadership role, you're in a management role, supervision, that kind of thing. Things that will help lower the stress level in the organization. Anytime you give people more autonomy and control over what they're doing, they tend to be less stressed out. I'm one of those people. I admit it. I hate micromanagers. You know, Derek wants me to develop something. Derek, give me a general idea of what you want. Go away. Let me develop it. I'll come back to you with something, but don't tell me you want me to do something and stand there and look over my shoulder. Nope, I wouldn't do that next. That's going to stress me out, and eventually it's going to stress him out. You know, make sure that people, you don't have a lot of control over the compensation thing, but there's lots of different ways to compensate people. You know, and the job demands and requirements, don't give people unrealistic things to do, or numbers of unrealistic things to do. You know, make sure people have the skills. You want me to be motivated to do a job, make sure I know how to do it. Don't make assumptions. You know, increase people's if people feel a part of a decision, they tend to be less stressed out. They tend to be more tuned in. If I'm waiting on other people to make decisions about my life, that is stress producing. So if you're in a management role, don't do that. You can improve the physical working conditions. I know a lot of people have these stand-up desks these days. I haven't gotten one yet, but I know people that swear by them. They like to be able to pull it up and move it down and this kind of thing. They say it makes all the difference in the world. If it works for them, it works for them. Provide as much job security as you can. That's in a little bit short supply these days, but try to reassure people as much as you can without being unrealistic or having rose-colored glasses. Provide healthy work schedules. One of the things that a lot of companies found was that going to a 4-day work week, when we're working 10-hour days, 4 days a week instead of 8 hours, 5 days a week, what you found in a lot of those situations with the younger workers liked it. They like having a 3-day weekend after working 10 hours a day for 4 days. The older workers hated it. So you got to be careful about implementing policies like that. And then just anytime you can improve communication, that's going to reduce the uncertainty, reduce the ambiguity. Again, don't tell people what they want to hear, knowing that it's not true. That's going to get you in a lot of trouble later. You want to help other people with their stress levels. Some of you do these things instinctively. That's just part of who you are. Some of you are much better probably at reading others' emotional cues, understanding their impact. Keep people connected. Empathize with those people who are, in pain. They're stressed out. Act to alleviate the suffering of others. This could be minor things to major things. I know something is stressing you out. Well, can I help you with that? Can I help you with that assignment? I'll be happy to do what I can. Help people to keep their lives on track, and you have to create a whole environment or a whole philosophy in your workplace where people feel like they can support each other without being penalized. And some people do things they don't realize they're. And then I just want to mention here at the end about wellness programs. I know Western Kentucky, we participate in a wellness program. I found it to be pretty helpful. It helps me be more aware of things. I talk to a health coach once a month about what's going on. And surprisingly, I found it to be very helpful. And some of the suggestions, these people know what they're talking about. I'm just kind of a slide here to advocate for those types of programs. So, as we're winding down here, I wanted to leave a little bit of time near the end. Just it all really comes down, as so many times in life, it all really comes down to you. And you got to figure out what you need specifically. You got to be careful about taking advice from other folks. Well, if you want to reduce your stress level, you need to do this. Well, that may work for you. It may or may not work for me. So, this is an individual thing for most folks. You got to figure out what your needs are and how to best meet your needs. And if you have your needs being met, your stress level is going to reduce almost automatically there. So again, Kara, I'll turn it over to you. Would love to entertain any questions that we have. May not have all the answers, but we'll do what we can. I've got a panel of experts here that can chime in too.
Well, we have a question that came in earlier in the program.
Sure.
Honestly, I can't remember which slide it was, but it was earlier from Donald, and he said, "Are putting different departments in competition for rewards at a job, is that good for employee morale?"
Having had quite a bit of experience, and I can only speak from my experience, I can defer to Derek and Kara and Anthony about this. To a point, as long as it's friendly competition, you start tying really tangible rewards. A lot of companies would do Kaizen types of things where they'd put one team against another team. And in some cases, I've known companies that the winners get to take a trip. They get something really, really, really expensive or whatever. Then that increased the stress levels immensely. You had people spying on each other and sabotaging each other and all kinds of things. As long as you keep it in a friendly kind of way, we have when I work with companies, I have a thing where, we need to be competitive, but we need to be competitive with the other people in our industry that we need to be competitive with. We don't need to be internally competitive on everything. We are all in this together, and I think that's a phrase that gets overused these days, but it's very true. As long as you manage those internal departmental competitions appropriately, you don't let them get out of hand, they can cause more stress than they alleviate if you're not careful. They can cause finger pointing, and you can have adults acting like 5-year-olds if you're not careful. So, nothing wrong with having a healthy competition, but you need to keep it on a kind of a superficial level. I don't know if my colleagues here want to chime in on that one or say anything, but not a bad thing inherently, but can be a really bad thing if you don't manage it appropriately. Yeah.
I don't know, Anthony and Derek, do you guys want to weigh in on that anymore?
No, I mean, I agree, Aaron. It's always, resources are always a stressor. It's the, your access to and the competition thereof. The thing that I've always found as a leader and a manager is also just kind of knowing what drives my measures and the things that I can control and focusing on that. And, particularly, kind of working with my leaders too, to then ensure that that's kind of a consistent approach throughout the organization. So we all do different jobs and we all get measured a little bit differently, but I know what my measures are and I know how to kind of, at the end of the day, feel like I have accomplished what I set out to accomplish and have been a wise steward of all the resources entrusted to me, so that when I need to ask for more resources to reduce my stress, that I have some justification in hand, rather than it being more kind of emotional or opinion based. It's really fact based at that point. Yeah,
I agree with that 100%. Yeah. I think we use competition in our society a lot. I mean, on a blood drive, you'll have the different Greek organizations competing against each other. To who can contribute the most and this kind of thing. And those are good types of things. So something good, but taking two departments in your company and having them both work on the same problem, whoever comes up with the best solution to the problem is going to get some really nice, tangible type of thing or whatever. That I've seen those kind of devolve into something that can almost be ugly. So you got to be careful about that and make people keep their perspective. Yeah. Anything else there?
Yeah,
Sarah?
we have another good question, and I think this one is probably on everyone's mind right now, of how do we deal with stress from not knowing what's going to happen to the job market or just in general in the next 6 months to a year? Definitely the elephant in the room these days.
Well, what's that prayer that you hear people talk about? You need the things that you can control and things that you can't control and know the difference. I honestly think it comes down to that. Something that you really don't have a lot of control over, you can worry yourself to death, but it's not going to be productive because you can't really affect the outcome. If you can affect the outcome, in the job market, my advice will always be just always do the best job that you can. If you give up because I don't know if I'm going to have a job and I start letting my job performance slip, then it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you just go full, you do the best job you can, as long as you can, and you try to keep yourself informed. There's a lot of folks out there giving misinformation. Some of it is intentional. A lot of it's not. People just don't know. Sometimes people in positions of responsibility think they should know, so they say things that sort of true, but you just need to make sure you are always aware of accurate information and just, don't assume the worst until you end up having to deal with it, and try to keep a good frame of mind about those types of things. There is a lot of uncertainty. It's not just in education. It's across the board these days of what's going to happen. Even when things start to really reopen, we still don't know what impact it's going to have long term on job security. So, if you're in a job, you got a job, do the best job you can. It gets noticed. It will always get noticed. And the people that start to slack up and, well, why would I want to, help whoever's going to still be here after I'm done? Well, you could end up, shooting yourself in the foot if you're not careful. Yeah.
Aaron, one thing I'd add is from the Alumni Association standpoint, one thing we've already started to kind of think about too is in an environment such as this, if you try to think and plan long term, that's what's inducing your stress because of the uncertainty. So we've actually created scenarios to where we've shortened our planning timelines to 90-day cycles, just because even within a 90-day cycle, with everything going on with COVID-19, that's even unpredictable, but it's at least a little bit more of a realistic time frame to know that during this time cycle, we're going to know more We're going to understand the
Yeah.
environment a little bit more, and we can kind of control that. And the things that we want to aspire to in the long-term future still remain, but we're not focused on that, because that's really where the stress is induced, is when you're trying to think about those 3 or 5 year goals that you've set for yourself, and you don't know if you're going to have a job 3 or 5 days later. And so to your point, I think, and the advice that I give my employees is accept the things you can control, which is your day, your work, your output, and just take it a day at a time. And that's all that each one of us can do. I think a lot of folks have come out of this time period with a sense of mortality too. And so that, making the most of every single day is kind of the key theme. And it is I find personally, I have to limit my exposure to the news. Sometimes I even have to stop working on a particular topic because it induces me to think about long-term things. And I find myself falling into that kind of pit of despair, and you got to kind of know and recognize that signal and kind of shut it off before you can kind of move on mentally.
I think that's great, because if you are one of those folks that the sky is always falling, you turn on the television, you'll get all kinds of evidence that'll reinforce that. If you're one of those folks that thinks, well, there's hope out there and we'll get through this, there's all kind of evidence out there too for that kind of thing. But I think, what we choose to watch and what we choose to consume as far as media, there's a lot of. The last thing I would add about that is, when you make decisions, always make decisions knowing that they may have to be modified. So, we've talked a lot about, the big question the students have is, are we going to be back to face-to-face classes, or still going to be online? Well, as you prepare for that, you don't know. So you have to prepare looking forward. Well, we're going to prepare for face-to-face. We're also going to be working on plan B just in case. We have to make some modifications to that. And so, eventually we will know what's going to happen, and we'll have to deal with it. But, you can find yourself laying awake all night talking about, this could be bad, and what if this, and what if that, and what if, and it's hard to turn that off in your head, but it's not really productive at all. And that would cause you to have more stress, because, we all know people that have their things that all they want to talk about is how bad things are. And you need to probably stay away from those folks too. Stay away from the merchants of doom, because they're not helping anybody. And last thing, stay away from all the conspiracy theory stuff. I was watching some of that stuff the other night. It's not productive. Okay,
So, I guess to kind of wrap us up here too, one kind of last question, which I think is a good one to end on, is, as we think about, a lot of us have gotten used to working at home, and we've kind of developed our mojo doing that for 7 weeks or 8 weeks, or however long it may have been in one particular instance. And now, as we start to think about going back to work, that's going to cause a new level of stress. So any kind of real quick tips that you got, Aaron, that you would recommend as you kind of, are you going to run back to the office and hug everyone, or?
Well, no, I'm one of those folks that I tend to be more productive there than I am here. There's a structure to it. That's why one of my things about advising people was try to stick to that schedule. I would get there. I'm a faculty member, but I was administrator for 10 years. I still show up at 8 o'clock every day. I'm usually there till about 4:30. I get a lot of stuff done. I can turn it off when I leave, for the most part. And so I'm kind of looking forward to moving back into that type of routine a little bit about things. But, it's like my dad in shift work. About the time you get used to this, now there's some folks out there that are really struggling with the Zoom and working from home. Well, eventually they're going to get really good at it. And about the time they get really good at it, we're all going to go back, and we're going to be doing something differently. It'll probably be a little bit different regardless, but, and then we're going to have to make that adjustment back, and it's not going to be what we think it's going to be. So the other thing I would add about that is that don't assume that when the light switch gets flicked, we're all going to run back to the office and things will be back exactly the way they were before. It's not. And you just need to be aware that's a reality. You don't want to dwell on it, because we don't know what that's going to look like. people want to know answers right now. When we go back, is there going to be social distancing? Is there going to be in the classroom? I'm going to have to all my students, we don't know. And so you just have to kind of be prepared. Most of us, we moved suddenly home. It was like all over a period of a couple of weeks, we were there and now we're here. Well, it may be more of a phased in thing, or it may be, well, we're all back, and so it's going to be stress producing. And I think the more flexible we can remain about that and just not let things get to us. At the beginning, I was one of those, the skies fall. I'm never going to be able to work from home. I got all my stuff here, all my computer and all this. Well, I've managed to adapt pretty well. Had to be a little creative about some things, but it works. You just have to keep an open mind about that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's a good thought to end on
Yeah.
there, Dr. Huey, of just
Yeah.
being adaptable, and I'd say,
Yeah.
In this period of disruption, the innovations that it's brought forward to each one of us in terms of how we've learned to either adopt new technology or balance work life in the environment of one. I know a lot of my employees have dealt with that of, they're not, their kids are there, they're a child care provider, teacher, educator, and worker all at the same time. And but I do think that what my recommendation would be is just kind of take the best of what you've enjoyed about this time period of working from home and bring that into your work life as we get back to whatever our normal in the future is going to look like, to your point, and not fret about those details.
I'm sure we'll all be saying, I'd really like to see Anthony's house again. I never get to see where he lives anymore, as we have with everybody that's been on any meeting I've been in or TV or whatever. Very good point. And I know, Kara, you put the satisfaction thing. I just want to mention that we do have some articles here, and I think, Anthony, you're going to include these with the link to the recording. We try to identify some really good resources here that you might want to follow up on. Also, some really good videos that deal with they go into a little bit more depth on some of the topics that we've been dealing with here today. And then a couple of resources that if you really get into this topic, we always have a few folks that really struggling, but there's a couple of really good resources out there on stress management available from Amazon.
Well, Dr. Huey, thank you once again for leading us in today's conversation about stress management strategies. And thank you to each one of our alumni and friends that have joined us for this webinar during its live broadcast. And, for those of you that watch us after the fact in this recording and enjoy the resources that Dr. Huey just kind of referenced, they'll be linked on the same page for future enjoyment. But for a list of our upcoming webinars and access to any of our additional resources, please visit the Alumni Association's Hilltoppers at Work page at alumni.wku.edu/Hilltoppers at Work. Thank you, Kara, for co-hosting and facilitating the conversations and Q&A today. And thank you, Derek and WKU Continuing Professional Development for their partnership in this webinar series. Look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks when we talk about motivation.
And again, I appreciate the opportunity to do these. I love working with Anthony and Derek and Kara on this type of thing. I do think these things make a difference. And again, if you tune into the motivation webinar, you'll see some of the stuff we talked about in the first two, because there's a method to the madness. It may be in only our minds, but it's there. Okay. But we're kind of painting a picture here. So we look forward to seeing some of you again next time.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.